Chapter 4 of Matilda. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Corrie Samuel. Matilda by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. Chapter 4. Among our most assiduous visitors was a young man of rank, well informed and agreeable in his person. After we had spent a few weeks in London, his attentions towards me became marked, and his visits more frequent. I was too much taken up by my own occupations and feelings to attend much to this, and then indeed I hardly noticed more than the bare surface of events as they passed around me. But I now remember that my father was restless and uneasy whenever this person visited us, and when we talked together, watched us with the greatest apparent anxiety, although he himself maintained a profound silence. At length these obnoxious visits suddenly ceased altogether, but from that moment I must date the change of my father, a change that to remember makes me shudder, and then filled me with the deepest grief. There were no degrees which could break my fall from happiness to misery. It was as the stroke of lightning, sudden and entire. Alas, I now met frowns where before I had been welcomed only with smiles. He, my beloved father, shunned me, and either treated me with harshness or a more heart-breaking coldness. We took no more sweet counsel together, and when I tried to win him again to me, his anger and the terrible emotions that he exhibited drove me to silence and tears. And this was sudden. The day before we had passed alone together in the country. I remember we had talked of future travels that we should undertake together. There was an eager delight in our tones and gestures that could only spring from deep and mutual love joined to the most unrestrained confidence. And now, the next day, the next hour, I saw his brows contracted, his eyes fixed in sullen fierceness on the ground, and his voice, so gentle and so dear, made me shiver when he addressed me. Often, when my wandering fancy brought by its various images now consolation and now aggravation of grief to my heart, I have compared myself to Persephone, who was gaily and heedlessly gathering flowers on the sweet plain of Enna, when the king of hell snatched her away to the abodes of death and misery. Alas, I who so lately knew of naught but the joy of life, who had slept only to dream sweet dreams, and awoke to incomparable happiness, I now passed my days and nights in tears. I who sought and had found joy in the love-breathing countenance of my father, now, when I dared fix on him a supplicating look, it was ever answered by an angry frown. I dared not speak to him, and when sometimes I had worked up courage to meet him and to ask an explanation, one glance at his face, where a chaos of mighty passion seemed for ever struggling, made me tremble and shrink to silence. I was dashed down from heaven to earth as a silly sparrow when pounced on by a hawk. My eyes swam, and my head was bewildered by the sudden apparition of grief. Day after day passed, marked only by my complaints and my tears. Often I lifted my soul in vain prayer for a softer descent from joy to woe, or if that were denied me, that I might be allowed to die, and fade for ever under the cruel blast that swept over me. For what should I do here, like a decaying flower, still withering under his bitter words, whose kindly heat should give my poor heart life? Sometimes I said to myself, this is an enchantment, and I must strive against it. My father is blinded by some malignant vision, which I must remove. And then, like David, I would try music to win the evil spirit from him. And once, while singing, I lifted my eyes towards him and saw his fixed on me and filled with tears. All his muscles seemed relaxed to softness. I sprung towards him with a cry of joy, and would have thrown myself into his arms, but he pushed me roughly from him and left me. And even from this slight incident he contracted fresh gloom and an additional severity of manner. There are many incidents that I might relate which showed the diseased yet incomprehensible state of his mind, but I will mention one that occurred while we were in company with several other persons. On this occasion I chanced to say that I thought Mara the best of Alfieri's tragedies. As I said this, I chanced to cast my eyes on my father, and met his. For the first time the expression of those beloved eyes displeased me, and I saw with affright that his whole frame shook with some concealed emotion that in spite of his efforts half conquered him. As this tempest faded from his soul, he became melancholy and silent. Every day some new scene occurred and displayed in him a mind working, as it were, with an unknown horror that now he could master, but which at times threatened to overturn his reason, and to throw the bright seat of his intelligence into a perpetual chaos. I will not dwell longer than I need on these disastrous circumstances. I might waste days in describing how anxiously I watched every change of fleeting circumstance that promised better days, and with what despair I found that each effort of mine aggravated his seeming madness. To tell all my grief, I might as well attempt to count the tears that have fallen from these eyes, or every sigh that has torn my heart. I will be brief, for there is in all this a horror that will not bear many words, and I sink almost a second time to death while I recall these sad scenes to my memory. O my beloved father, indeed you made me miserable beyond all words, but how truly did I even then forgive you, and how entirely did you possess my whole heart, while I endeavoured, as a rainbow gleams upon a cataract, to soften thy tremendous sorrows. Thus did this change come about. I seem perhaps to have dashed too suddenly into the description, but thus suddenly did it happen. In one sentence I have passed from the idea of unspeakable happiness to that of unspeakable grief, but they were thus closely linked together. We had remained 5 months in London, 3 of joy and 2 of sorrow. My father and I were now seldom alone, or if we were, he generally kept silence with his eyes fixed on the ground. The dark, full orbs, in which before I delighted to read all sweet and gentle feeling, shadowed from my sight by their lids and the long lashes that fringed them. When we were in company he affected gaiety, but I wept to hear his hollow laugh, begun by an empty smile, and often ending in a bitter sneer, such as never before this fatal period had wrinkled his lips. When others were there, he often spoke to me, and his eyes perpetually followed my slightest motion. His accents whenever he addressed me were cold and constrained, although his voice would tremble when he perceived that my full heart choked the answer to words proffered with a mien yet new to me. But days of peaceful melancholy were of rare occurrence. They were often broken in upon by gusts of passion that drove me as a weak boat on a stormy sea to seek a cove for shelter. But the winds blew from my native harbour, and I was cast far, far out, until shattered I perished, when the tempest had passed and the sea was apparently calm. I do not know that I can describe his emotions. Sometimes he only betrayed them by a word or gesture, and then retired to his chamber, and I crept as near it as I dared, and listened with fear to every sound, yet still more dreading a sudden silence, dreading I knew not what, but ever full of fear. It was after one tremendous day, when his eyes had glared on me like lightning, and his voice, sharp and broken, seemed unable to express the extent of his emotion, that, In the evening, when I was alone, he joined me with a calm countenance, and not noticing my tears, which I quickly dried when he approached, told me that in 3 days that he intended to remove with me to his estate in Yorkshire, and bidding me prepare, left me hastily, as if afraid of being questioned. This determination on his part indeed surprised me. This estate was that which he had inhabited in childhood, and near which my mother resided while a girl. This was the scene of their youthful loves, and where they had lived after their marriage. In happier days, my father had often told me that however he might appear weaned from his widow sorrow, and free from bitter recollections elsewhere, yet he would never dare visit the spot where he had enjoyed her society, or trust himself to see the rooms that so many years ago they had inhabited together, her favourite walks, and the gardens the flowers of which she had delighted to cultivate. And now, while he suffered intense misery, he determined to plunge into still more intense, and strove for greater emotion than that which already tore him. I was perplexed, and most anxious to know what this portended. Ah, what could it portend but ruin? I saw little of my father during this interval, but he appeared calmer, although not less unhappy than before. On the morning of the 3rd day, he informed me that he had determined to go to Yorkshire first alone, and that I should follow him in a fortnight unless I heard anything from him in the meantime that should contradict this command. He departed the same day, and 4 days afterwards I received a letter from his steward telling me in his name to join him with as little delay as possible. After travelling day and night, I arrived with an anxious, yet a hoping heart. For why should he send for me, if it were only to avoid me, and to treat me with the apparent aversion that he had in London? I met him at the distance of 30 miles from our mansion. His demeanour was sad. For a moment he appeared glad to see me, and then he checked himself, as if unwilling to betray his feelings. He was silent during our ride, yet his manner was kinder than before, and I thought I beheld a softness in his eyes that gave me hope. When we arrived, after a little rest, he led me over the house, and pointed out to me the rooms which my mother had inhabited. Although more than 16 years had passed since her death, nothing had been changed. Her work-box, her writing desk were still there, and in her room a book lay open on the table as she had left it. My father pointed out these circumstances with a serious and unaltered mien, only now and then fixing his deep and liquid eyes upon me. There was something strange and awful in his look that overcame me, and in spite of myself I wept. Nor did he attempt to console me, but I saw his lips quiver, and the muscles of his countenance seemed convulsed. We walked together in the gardens, and in the evening, when I would have retired, he asked me to stay and read to him, and first said, "When I was last here, your mother read Dante to me. You shall go on where she left off." And then in a moment he said, "No, that must not be. You must not read Dante. Do you choose a book." I took up Spencer, and read the Descent of Sir Guyon to the Halls of Avarice. While he listened, his eyes fixed on me in sad, profound silence. I heard the next morning from the steward that upon his arrival he had been in a most terrible state of mind. He had passed the first night in the garden, lying on the damp grass. He did not sleep, but groaned perpetually. "Alas," said the old man, who gave me this account with tears in his eyes, "it wrings my heart to see my lord in this state. When I heard that he was coming down here with you, my young lady, I thought we should have the happy days over again that we enjoyed during the short life of my lady, your mother. But that would be too much happiness for us poor creatures born to tears, and that was why she was taken from us so soon. She was too beautiful and good for us. It was a happy day as we all thought it when my lord married her. I knew her when she was a child, and many a good turn has she done for me in my old lady's time. You are like her, although there is more of my lord in you. But has he been thus ever since his return? All my joy turned to sorrow when I first beheld him, with that melancholy countenance, enter these doors, as if it were the day after my lady's funeral. He seemed to recover himself a little after he had bidden me write to you, but still it is a woeful thing to see him so unhappy. These were the feelings of an old, faithful servant. What must be those of an affectionate daughter? Alas, even then my heart was almost broken. We spent 2 months together in this house. My father spent the greater part of his time with me. He accompanied me in my walks, listened to my music, and leant over me as I read or painted. When he conversed with me, his manner was cold and constrained. His eyes only seemed to speak, and as he turned their black, full lustre towards me, they expressed a living sadness. There was something in those dark, deep orbs, so liquid and intense, that even in happiness I could never meet their full gaze that mine did not overflow. Yet it was with sweet tears. Now there was a depth of affliction in their gentle appeal that rent my heart with sympathy. They seemed to desire peace for me, for himself a heart patient to suffer, a craving for sympathy, yet a perpetual self-denial. It was only when he was absent from me that his passion subdued him, that he clinched his hands, knit his brows, and with haggard looks called for death to his despair, raving wildly, until exhausted he sank down, nor was revived until I joined him. While we were in London there was a harshness and sullenness in his sorrow, which had now entirely disappeared. There I shrunk and fled from him. Now I only wished to be with him, that I might soothe him to peace. When he was silent I tried to divert him, and when sometimes I stole to him during the energy of his passion, I wept, but did not desire to leave him. Yet he suffered fearful agony. During the day he was more calm, but at night, when I could not be with him, he seemed to give the reins to his grief. He often passed his nights either on the floor in my mother's room, or in the garden, and when in the morning he saw me view with poignant grief his exhausted frame, and his person languid almost to death with watching, he wept. But during all this time he spoke no word by which I might guess the cause of his unhappiness. If I ventured to inquire, he would either leave me or press his finger to his lips, and with a deprecating look that I could not resist, turn away. If I wept, he would gaze on me in silence, but he was no longer harsh, and although he repulsed every caress, yet it was with gentleness. He seemed to cherish a mild grief and softer emotions, although sad, as a relief from despair. He contrived in many ways to nurse his melancholy as an antidote to wilder passion. He perpetually frequented the walks that had been favourites with him when he and my mother wandered together, talking of love and happiness. He collected every relic that remained of her, and always sat opposite her picture, which hung in the room, fixing on it a look of sad despair, and all this was done in a mystic and awful silence. If his passion subdued him, he locked himself in his room, and at night, when he wandered restlessly about the house, it was when every other creature slept. It may easily be imagined that I wearied myself with conjecture to guess the cause of his sorrow. The solution that seemed to me the most probable was that, during his residence in London, he had fallen in love with some unworthy person, and that his passion mastered him, although he would not gratify it. He loved me too well to sacrifice me to this inclination, and that he had now visited this house, that by reviving the memory of my mother, whom he so passionately adored, he might weaken the present impression. This was possible, but it was a mere conjecture, unfounded on any fact. Could there be guilt in it? He was too upright and noble to do aught that his conscience would not approve. I did not yet know of the crime there may be in involuntary feeling, and therefore ascribed his tumultuous starts and gloomy looks wholly to the struggles of his mind, and not any as they were partly due to the worst fiend of all, remorse. But still do I flatter myself that this would have passed away. His paroxysms of passion were terrific, but his soul bore him through them triumphant, though almost destroyed by victory. But the day would finally have been won, had not I, foolish and presumptuous wretch, hurried him on until there was no recall, no hope. My rashness gave the victory in this dreadful fight to the enemy who triumphed over him as he lay fallen and vanquished. I alone was the cause of his defeat, and justly did I pay the fearful penalty. I said to myself, let him receive sympathy, and these struggles will cease. Let him confide his misery to another heart, and half the weight of it will be lightened. I will win him to me, he shall not deny his grief to me, and when I know his secret, then will I pour a balm into his soul, and again I shall enjoy the ravishing delight of beholding his smile, and of again seeing his eyes beam, if not with pleasure, at least with gentle love and thankfulness. This will I do, I said. Half I accomplished. I gained his secret, and we were both lost for ever. End of chapter 4. Chapter 5 of Matilda. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Corey Samuel. Matilda by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. Chapter 5. Nearly a year had passed since my father's return, and the seasons had almost finished their round. It was now the end of May. The woods were clothed in their freshest verdure, and the sweet smell of the new-mown grass was in the fields. I thought that the balmy air and the lovely face of nature might aid me in inspiring him with mild sensations, and give him gentle feelings of peace and love preparatory to the confidence I determined to win from him. I chose therefore the evening of one of these days for my attempt. I invited him to walk with me, and led him to a neighbouring wood of beech trees, whose light shade shielded us from the slant and dazzling beams of the descending sun. After walking for some time in silence, I seated myself with him on a mossy hillock. It is strange, but even now I seem to see the spot. The slim and smooth trunks were many of them wound round by ivy, whose shining leaves of the darkest green contrasted with the white bark and the light leaves of the young sprouts of beech that grew from their parent trunks. The short grass was mingled with moss, and was partly covered by the dead leaves of the last autumn that, driven by the winds, had here and there collected in little hillocks. There were a few moss-grown stumps about. The leaves were gently moved by the breeze, and through their green canopy you could see the bright blue sky. As evening came on, the distant trunks were reddened by the sun, and the wind died entirely away, while a few birds flew past us to their evening rest. Well, it was here we sat together, and when you hear all that passed, all that of terrible tore our souls even in this placid spot, which, but for strange passions, might have been a paradise to us, you will not wonder that I remember it, as I looked on it that its calm might give me calm, and inspire me not only with courage, but with persuasive words. I saw all these things, and in a vacant manner noted them in my mind, while I endeavoured to arrange my thoughts in fitting order for my attempt. My heart beat fast, as I worked myself up to speak to him, for I was determined not to be repulsed, but I trembled to imagine what effect my words might have on him. At length, with much hesitation, I began. Your kindness to me, my dearest father, and the affection, the excessive affection that you had for me when you first returned, will, I hope, excuse me in your eyes that I dare speak to you, although with the tender affection of a daughter, yet also with the freedom of a friend and equal. But pardon me, I entreat you, and listen to me, do not turn away from me, do not be impatient. You may easily intimidate me into silence, but my heart is bursting, nor can I willingly consent to endure for one moment longer the agony of uncertitude which for the last 4 months has been my portion. Listen to me, dearest friend, and permit me to gain your confidence. Are the happy days of mutual love which have passed to be to me as a dream, never to return? Alas! You have a secret grief that destroys us both, but you must permit me to win this secret from you. Tell me, can I do nothing? You well know that on the whole earth there is no sacrifice that I would not make, no labour that I would not undergo with the mere hope that I might bring you ease. But if no endeavour on my part can contribute to your happiness, let me at least know your sorrow, and surely my earnest love and deep sympathy must soothe your despair. I fear that I speak in a constrained manner. My heart is overflowing with the ardent desire I have of bringing calm once more to your looks and thoughts. But I fear to aggravate your grief, or to raise that in you which is death to me, anger and distaste. Do not then continue to fix your eyes on the earth. Raise them on me, for I can read your soul in them. Speak to me, and pardon my presumption. Alas! I am a most unhappy creature. I was breathless with emotion, and I paused, fixing my earnest eyes on my father, after I had dashed away the intrusive tears that dimmed them. He did not raise his, but after a short silence he replied to me in a low voice. You are indeed presumptuous, Matilda, presumptuous and very rash. In the heart of one like me there are secret thoughts working, and secret tortures which you ought not to seek to discover. I cannot tell you how it adds to my grief to know that I am the cause of uneasiness to you, but this will pass away, and I hope that soon we shall be as we were a few months ago. Restrain your impatience, or you may mar what you attempt to alleviate. Do not again speak to me in this strain, but wait in submissive patience the event of what is passing around you. Oh yes, I passionately replied. I will be very patient. I will not be rash or presumptuous. I will see the agonies and tears and despair of my father, my only friend, my hope, my shelter. I will see it all with folded arms and downcast eyes. You do not treat me with candour. It is not true what you say. This will not soon pass away. It will last for ever if you deign not to speak to me, to admit my consolations. Dearest, dearest father, pity me and pardon me. I entreat you, do not drive me to despair. Indeed, I must not be repulsed. There is one thing which, although it may torture me to know, yet that you must tell me. I demand, and most solemnly I demand, if in any way I am the cause of your unhappiness. Do you not see my tears which I in vain strive against? You hear unmoved my voice broken by sobs. Feel how my hand trembles. My whole heart is in the words I speak, and you must not endeavour to silence me by mere words barren of meaning. The agony of my doubt hurries me on, and you must reply. I beseech you, by your former love for me, now lost, I adjure you to answer that one question. Am I the cause of your grief? He raised his eyes from the ground, but still turning them away from me, said, Besought by that plea, I will answer your rash question. Yes, you are the sole, the agonizing cause of all I suffer, of all I must suffer until I die. Now beware, be silent, do not urge me to your destruction. I am struck by the storm, rooted up, laid waste, but you can stand against it. You are young, and your passions are at peace. One word might I speak, and then you would be implicated in my destruction, yet that word is hovering on my lips. Oh, there is a fearful chasm, but I adjure you to beware. Ah, dearest friend, I cried, do not fear. Speak that word, it will bring peace, not death. If there is a chasm, our mutual love will give us wings to pass it, and we shall find flowers, and verdure, and delight on the other side. I threw myself at his feet, and took his hand. Yes, speak, and we shall be happy. There will no longer be doubt, no dreadful uncertainty. Trust me, my affection will soothe your sorrow. Speak that word, and all danger will be past, and we shall love each other as before, and for ever. He snatched his hand from me, and rose in violent disorder. What do you mean? You know not what you mean. Why do you bring me out, and torture me, and tempt me, and kill me? Much happier would it be for you, and for me, if in your frantic curiosity you tore my heart from my breast, and tried to read its secrets in it, as its life's blood was dropping from it. Thus you may console me by reducing me to nothing, but your words I cannot bear. Soon they will make me mad, quite mad, and then I shall utter strange words, and you will believe them, and we shall both be lost for ever. I tell you, I am on the very verge of insanity. Why, cruel girl, do you drive me on? You will repent, and I shall die. When I repeat his words, I wonder at my pertinacious folly. I hardly know what feelings resistlessly impelled me. I believe it was that, coming out with the determination not to be repulsed, I went right forward to my object, without well weighing his replies. I was led by passion, and drew him with frantic heedlessness into the abyss that he so fearfully avoided. I replied to his terrific words. You fill me with affright, it is true, dearest father, but you only confirm my resolution to put an end to this state of doubt. I will not be put off thus. Do you think I can live thus fearfully from day to day, the sword in my bosom yet kept from its mortal wound by a hair, a word? I demand that dreadful word, though it be as a flash of lightning to destroy me. Speak it. Alas, alas, what am I become? But a few months have elapsed since I believed that I was all the world to you, and that there was no happiness or grief for you on earth unshared by your Matilda, your child. That happy time is no longer, and what I most dreaded in this world is come upon me. In the despair of my heart, I see what you cannot conceal. You no longer love me. I adjure you, my father, has not an unnatural passion seized upon your heart? Am I not the most miserable worm that crawls? Do I not embrace your knees, and you most cruelly repulse me? I know it. I see it. You hate me. I was transported by violent emotion, and rising from his feet, at which I had thrown myself, I leant against a tree, wildly raising my eyes to heaven. He began to answer with violence. Yes, yes, I hate you. You are my bane, my poison, my disgust. Oh, no. And then his manner changed, and fixing his eyes on me with an expression that convulsed every nerve and member of my frame. You are none of all of these. You are my light, my only one, my life. My daughter, I love you. The last words died away in a hoarse whisper, but I heard them and sunk on the ground, covering my face and almost dead with excess of sickness and fear. A cold perspiration covered my forehead, and I shivered in every limb. But he continued, clasping his hands with a frantic gesture. Now I have dashed from the top of the rock to the bottom. Now I have precipitated myself down the fearful chasm. The danger is over. She is alive. O Matilda, lift up those dear eyes in the light of which I live. Let me hear the sweet tones of your beloved voice in peace and calm. Monster as I am, you are still, as you ever were, lovely, beautiful beyond expression. What I have become since this last moment I know not. Perhaps I am changed in mien as the fallen angel. I do not believe I am, for I have surely a new soul within me, and my blood riots through my veins. I am burnt up with fever. But these are precious moments. Devil as I am become, yet that is my Matilda before me, whom I love as one never before was loved, and she knows it now. She listens to these words which I thought, fool as I was, would blast her to death. Come, come, the worst is past. No more grief, tears, or despair. Were not those the words you uttered? We have leapt the chasm I told you of, and now, mark me, Matilda, we are to find flowers, and verdure, and delight, or is it hell, and fire, and tortures? O beloved one, I am borne away. I can no longer sustain myself. Surely this is death that is coming. Let me lay my head near your heart. Let me die in your arms. He sunk to the earth, fainting, while I, nearly as lifeless, gazed on him in despair. Yes, it was despair I felt. For the first time that phantom seized me, the first and only time, for it has never since left me. After the first moments of speechless agony, I felt her fangs on my heart. I tore my hair. I raved aloud. At one moment in pity for his sufferings, I would have clasped my father in my arms. Then, starting back with horror, I spurned him with my foot. I felt as if stung by a serpent, as if scourged by a whip of scorpions that drove me. Ah, whither, whither? Well, this could not last. One idea rushed on my mind. Never, never may I speak to him again. As this terrible conviction came upon me, it melted my soul to tenderness and love. I gazed on him as to take my last farewell. He lay insensible, his eyes closed, his cheeks deathly pale. Above, the leaves of the birch wood cast a flickering shadow on his face, and waved in mournful melody over him. I saw all these things, and said, "Ay, this is his grave." And then I wept aloud, and raised my eyes to heaven to entreat for a respite to my despair, and an alleviation for his unnatural suffering. The tears that gushed in a warm and healing stream from my eyes relieved the burden that oppressed my heart almost to madness. I wept for a long time, until I saw him about to revive, when horror and misery again recurred, and the tide of my sensations rolled back to their former channel. With a terror I could not restrain, I sprung up and fled with winged speed along the paths of the wood and across the fields, until, nearly dead, I reached our house. And, just ordering the servants to seek my father at the spot I indicated, I shut myself up in my own room. End of chapter 5. Chapter 6 of Matilda. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Corrie Samuel. Matilda by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. Chapter 6. My chamber was in a retired part of the house, and looked upon the garden, so that no sound of the other inhabitants could reach it, and here, in perfect solitude, I wept for several hours. When a servant came to ask me if I would take food, I learnt from him that my father had returned, and was apparently well, and this relieved me from a load of anxiety, yet I did not cease to weep bitterly. At first, as the memory of former happiness contrasted to my present despair came across me, I gave relief to the oppression of heart that I felt by words, and groans, and heart-rending sighs. But nature became wearied, and this more violent grief gave place to a passionate but mute flood of tears. My whole soul seemed to dissolve in them. I did not wring my hands, or tear my hair, or utter wild exclamations, but as Boccaccio describes the intense and quiet grief of Sigismunda over the heart of Guiscardo, I sat, with my hands folded, silently letting fall a perpetual stream from my eyes. Such was the depth of my emotion that I had no feeling of what caused my distress. My thoughts even wandered to many indifferent objects, but still neither moving limb nor feature, my tears fell, until, as if the fountains were exhausted, they gradually subsided, and I awoke to life as from a dream. When I had ceased to weep, reason and memory returned upon me, and I began to reflect with greater calmness on what had happened, and how it became me to act. A few hours only had passed, but a mighty revolution had taken place with regard to me. The natural work of years had been transacted since the morning. My father was as dead to me, and I felt for a moment as if he, with white hairs, were laid in his coffin, and I, youth vanished in approaching age, were weeping at his timely dissolution. But it was not so. I was yet young, oh, far too young, nor was he dead to others. But I, most miserable, must never see or speak to him again. I must fly from him with more earnestness than from my greatest enemy. In solitude or in cities I must never more behold him. That consideration made me breathless with anguish, and impressing itself on my imagination, I was unable for a time to follow up any train of ideas. Ever after this, I thought, I would live in the most dreary seclusion. I would retire to the continent and become a nun, not for religion's sake, for I was not a Catholic, but that I might be for ever shut out from the world. I should there find solitude, where I might weep, and the voices of life might never reach me. But my father, my beloved and most wretched father, would he die? Would he never overcome the fierce passion that now held pitiless dominion over him? Might he not, many, many years hence, when age had quenched the burning sensations that he now experienced, might he not then be again a father to me? This reflection unwrinkled my brow, and I could feel, and I wept to feel it, a half-melancholy smile draw from my lips their expression of suffering. I dared indulge better hopes for my future life. Years must pass, but they would speed lightly away, winged by hope, or if they passed heavily, still they would pass, and I had not lost my father for ever. Let him spend another 16 years of desolate wandering. Let him once more utter his wild complaints to the vast woods and the tremendous cataracts of another clime. Let him again undergo fearful danger and soul-quelling hardships. Let the hot sun of the south again burn his passion-worn cheeks, and the cold night rains fall on him and chill his blood. To this life, miserable father, I devote thee. Go, be thy days passed with savages, and thy nights under the cope of heaven. Be thy limbs worn, and thy heart chilled, and all youth be dead within thee. Let thy hairs be as snow, thy walk trembling, and thy voice have lost its mellow tones. Let the liquid lustre of thine eyes be quenched, and then return to me, return to thy Matilda, thy child, who may then be clasped in thy loved arms, while thy heart beats with sinless emotion. Go, devoted one, and return thus. This is my curse, a daughter's curse. Go, and return pure to thy child, who will never love aught but thee. These were my thoughts, and with trembling hands I prepared to begin a letter to my unhappy parent. I had now spent many hours in tears and mournful meditation. It was past 12 o'clock. All was at peace in the house, and the gentle air that stole in at my window did not rustle the leaves of the twining plants that shadowed it. I felt the entire tranquillity of the hour, when my own breath and involuntary sobs were all the sounds that struck upon the air. On a sudden I heard a gentle step ascending the stairs. I paused breathless, and as it approached, glided into an obscure corner of the room. The steps paused at my door, but after a few moments they again receded, descended the stairs, and I heard no more. This slight incident gave rise in me to the most painful reflections, nor do I now dare express the emotions I felt. That he should be restless I understood, that he should wander as an unlaid ghost, and find no quiet from the burning hell that consumed his heart. But why approach my chamber? Was not that sacred? I felt almost ready to faint while he had stood there, but I had not betrayed my wakefulness by the slightest motion, though I had heard my own heart beat with violent fear. He had withdrawn. Oh, never, never may I see him again. Tomorrow night the same roof may not cover us, he or I must depart. The mutual link of our destinies is broken, we must be divided by seas, by land. The stars and the sun must not rise at the same period to us. He must not say, looking at the setting crescent of the moon, Matilda now watches its fall. No, all must be changed. Be it light with him when it is darkness with me. Let him feel the sun of summer while I am chilled by the snows of winter. Let there be the distance of the antipodes between us. At length the east began to brighten, and the comfortable light of morning streamed into my room. I was weary with watching, and for some time I had combated with the heavy sleep that weighed down my eyelids. But now, no longer fearful, I threw myself on my bed. I sought for repose, although I did not hope for forgetfulness. I knew I should be pursued by dreams, but did not dread the frightful one that I really had. I thought that I had risen, and went to seek my father to inform him of my determination to separate myself from him. I sought him in the house, in the park, and then in the fields and the woods, but I could not find him. At length I saw him at some distance, seated under a tree, and when he perceived me he waved his hand several times, beckoning me to approach. There was something unearthly in his mien that awed and chilled me, but I drew near. When at a short distance from him, I saw that he was deadly pale, and clothed in flowing garments of white. Suddenly he started up and fled from me. I pursued him. We sped over the fields, and by the skirts of woods, and on the banks of rivers. He flew fast, and I followed. We came at last, methought, to the brow of a huge cliff that overhung the sea, which, troubled by the winds, dashed against its base at a distance. I heard the roar of the waters. He held his course right on towards the brink, and I became breathless with fear lest he should plunge down the dreadful precipice. I tried to augment my speed, but my knees failed beneath me. Yet I had just reached him, just caught a part of his flowing robe, when he leapt down, and I awoke with a violent scream. I was trembling, and my pillow was wet with my tears. For a few moments my heart beat hard. But the bright beams of the sun and the chirping of the birds quickly restored me to myself, and I rose with a languid spirit, yet wondering what events the day would bring forth. Some time passed before I summoned courage to ring the bell for my servant, and when she came I still dared not utter my father's name. I ordered her to bring my breakfast to my room, and was again left alone, yet still I could make no resolve, but only thought that I might write a note to my father to beg his permission to pay a visit to a relation who lived about 30 miles off, and who had before invited me to her house. But I had refused, for then I could not quit my suffering father. When the servant came back, she gave me a letter. "From whom is this letter?" I asked, trembling. "Your father left it, madam, with his servant, to be given to you when you should rise." "My father left it? Where is he? Is he not here?" "No, he quitted the house before 4 this morning." "Good God! He is gone. But tell how this was. Speak quick." Her relation was short. He had gone in the carriage to the nearest town, where he took a post-chaise and horses with orders for the London road. He dismissed his servants there, only telling them that he had had a sudden call of business, and that they were to obey me as their mistress until his return. End of chapter 6.